Welcome to Real Vision. My name is Santiago Velez, and today I'm here with the co-founder and CEO of Elrond, which is an exciting project that we hope to showcase and learn more about. Welcome, Beniamin Mincu. Welcome to Real Vision.
Santiago, really great to connect and have this conversation. Thanks for having me.
All right. So full transparency, I've been in the blockchain space for a while as an observer, investor. I've done many interviews, but I had never heard of the project until fairly recently. And there's been an incredible amount of buzz around it. And I think it's been driven largely by a really powerful community. So first of all, let's find out a little bit about yourself and how you got into this. And then we'll get into the project and what you guys are trying to do. So tell us about where you come from.
Definitely. So the idea is that I've been in the blockchain space since probably 2013, when I initially stumbled into Bitcoin, went deep down the rabbit hole, and had this fundamental insight that this space was going to essentially take over the economy. And at that point, I was looking at two things, specifically the new things that Bitcoin was going to enable. And then I was also trying to take a very careful look at some of the potential limitations of Bitcoin, because immediately as things were becoming clear to me, it was also clear that there were some limitations there. And so in 2014, I became part of the NEM core team. And then in 2016, together with my brother, we essentially formed a fund through which we invested in something like more than 30 architecture blockchain startups. And throughout this process, we had a really deep understanding of both the fundamental issues, the attempted solutions, and then all the progress that was being made or not being made. And so at the end of 2017, after investing in all this exciting and interesting startups, which none of them would essentially deliver the solution that we were looking for, it was clear that we were still in a space where there were two fundamental problems. One of them was we got sort of stuck in a dial-up version of the blockchain space. And the second one was that UX was so terrible that people had to learn rocket science to basically be able to do a few transactions. And so this was the point at which we essentially gathered a team of really resourceful engineers from some of the top tech companies in the world, with PhDs in computer science and so forth, Olympiads in math and other technical fields. And we started from the point of gathering a team with which we can literally build rockets, because then, in essence, any problem we would attempt to solve would not be as difficult as solving this kind of very rocket science technical problems. Elrond started from this point with the goal of building an architecture that could bring a 1000x improvement in throughput, execution speed, and transaction.
What we're showing you here on our YouTube channel is just the tip of the iceberg. No matter where you are in your financial journey, whether you're a beginner just looking to break into the market or a financial professional looking to up your game, Real Vision has something for everyone. Every day, our team of expert journalists provides in-depth analysis, written reports, access to live streams, and access to our community, The Exchange, where you can interact with people just like you from all over the world. For just $1, you can unlock all of this and more at realvision.com. Try our Essential tier. If you like what you see, it's only $20 a month thereafter. So click on the link in the description, go to realvision.com, and see what you think. We look forward to seeing you there.
With the goal of building an architecture that could bring a 1000x improvement in throughput, execution speed, and transaction cost, because we believe that in order for blockchain to really see widespread adoption, we would require a transition from dial-up to broadband in the blockchain space. This is how it all started. We basically had two important breakthroughs that Elrond was built on. The first one was this idea of adaptive state sharding, where instead of processing transaction in a serial manner by all computers at the same time, you basically divide and conquer. So split the network into smaller networks, parallelize transaction processing. And the key point is that you can basically have a network that increases with the demand that it requires. So this was one of the elements. And then the second element was, if you can scale transaction processing, you also need a very, very efficient, effective and secure consensus mechanism. And this is how we came up with secure proof of stake. From that point, there's an entire discussion to where we came and so forth. But the most important thing is that Elrond is live. Open source, can process much more than we initially set out to. And happy to dive into the process, how we came here, and where we are at this point.
Excellent. So if I'm understanding correctly, Elrond tries to solve the central problem of kind of the layer one, generation one blockchains, right? Essentially this trade-off between security, decentralization, and scalability, right? And you're always having to trade one of those for the other. And so what you're saying is that you put some very talented people to try and solve the problem and scale without compromising, I guess, some of the core values. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, so I think the blockchain trilemma is basically an assumption that was made at the time where the discussion had some clear limitation on the technical engineering front, but is not necessarily a real fundamental, let's say, constraint. So the trilemma is just an assumption that people at that point coined because they had no better alternative or better solution space in mind. But at this point, I don't think that the trilemma applies in the sense that you can have both high speed and bandwidth, real security and decentralization in a way that was not possible in 2014 when this trilemma was initially introduced. And I believe Elrond creates a new solution space to imagine things, right? When it's like you're trying to look at things in a two-dimensional space, then you have some clear constraint. When you're looking at them from 3 dimensions and so on, you have a different kind of solution space. And this is where we're at this point.
All right, so let's take each of these two kind of solution subsets independently. We'll discuss each. So first, let's get into the sharding. That's a term that I've heard originally used and applied to Ethereum in their Ethereum 2.0. So you touched upon it briefly, but can you describe a little bit more what sharding is, how it solves this problem, and maybe kind of some of the weaknesses maybe, and how you address those weaknesses. So can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. So maybe it would be really good to touch upon the technical contributions that we're trying to bring, as you suggest, and then also discuss about a new layer where we're trying to address UX with a vertically integrated application called Maiar. But this may be in the second step. Coming to your question, the idea with sharding was this. When you're thinking about solving scalability, the key point is you have blockchain. Blockchain enables this kind of peer-to-peer decentralized transfer of value between any party without the need for a trusted third party. But with Bitcoin and then Ethereum, we could only process something like 7 transactions per second, and then around 15 transactions per second. So the natural question was, how can we scale this up and scale it significantly so that we don't have to discuss about the performance problem? And for us, it was very, very important to zoom out and understand that this was the conversation that initially emerged in the early internet days, where we had dial-up, and on top of dial-up connection speeds, you could only build so much. There was some clear limitations on anything that you could think of, and then making that business idea have a use case that was not killing the business, where the economics made sense. So it seems to me that generally we're at the point where there are a lot of exciting ideas, but without this transition from dial-up to broadband, you will not be able to see this spectrum of ideas really take hold at a global level. Now, there have been some directions to addressing the scalability issues. Incremental solutions that were just sort of horizontal scaling and then vertical scaling. The idea was that most of the solution that came were just maybe 2 times better, 3 times better, and so forth. But what we saw from the beginning is that if you from 7 transactions per second move to 15, or from 15 to 30, you essentially have the same problem, just 3 months or 6 months down the road again. So the question was, what would be a sufficiently high bandwidth that would enable us to focus on building the solutions and not to have the discussions regarding the limitations anymore? Because if we can reach this point, at that point, things would change significantly. Businesses would be able to adopt things. The startup ideas or application ideas could be really built, and so forth. So there have been improvements tried where particular nodes, so you have the same network in which all the nodes process all the workload at the same time, in a kind of serialized manner. And this has been an improvement where within such a network topology, you basically try to improve the hardware of the nodes so that you can process things faster, but you essentially still process them with the entire network, the whole workload in a serialized manner. And this is a kind of constraint that does not allow you to improve significantly. Of course, you can improve like a few times, 2, 3, 5 times, but then there's a clear limitation there. And the other approach was to think how you can, as a network, split the workload to several networks within the larger network and process workload in a localized manner. So within one network, you have 4 smaller networks. And by having 4 smaller networks, you can process 4 times, 5 times workload that you would otherwise. Now, of course, this is what essentially sharding means. You basically split the network, as I said, and then process the workload in a parallelized manner. The question then becomes, how can you maintain security? How can you maintain efficiency in this type of setting? And for this, we basically put a lot of thought into creating a structure that relies on random sampling of the consensus group, so that from the outset, when a node comes within the network, joins the network, the node is randomly put in one of the shards that are available. And within that shard, there are 500 nodes that are eligible to be part of a consensus group. And then within that 500 nodes group, we have a 61 group that's basically proposing and validating a block every 6 seconds now. Now, this idea means that for every 6 seconds, you have out of the 500 eligible nodes group, a group that is randomly selected, that you cannot foretell who will be in this consensus group. And then as soon as they're selected, you don't have enough time to essentially attack this group in a decisive way. And then as soon as this block is proposed, a randomly reshuffled group of consensus is again formed and so forth. And to increase this level of security, we've then, at the end of each epoch, which now is defined basically as 24 hours, you basically have 1/3 of nodes in each shard being reshuffled to other shards so as to increase the level of security even more. I'm curious how much this makes sense, and if you want to clarify more on this front, or also a bit more on the secure proof of stake consensus element.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess stepping back for a second, I would say that what I'm observing is that there's kind of been two significant conceptual realizations for your project. The first is that you needed to have a layer one blockchain system that was sufficiently, had enough performance that business logic could be abstracted onto it without compromise, right? Because, it would be kind of like trying to build Netflix on top of dial-up back in the 90s. It wouldn't have worked. That kind of business model just wouldn't have worked. So I guess you reasoned that you had to solve the layer one problem first, and then you could have all the throughput that you would want to build the businesses on. And then the second conceptual kind of push was, all right, how do you horizontally scale while not compromising on security using the sharding methodology, and then still be able to achieve consensus? And I think that was giving up this concept that all nodes everywhere have to know everything at all times, right? So this idea that shared state as a consensus has to be 100% overlap for everything. And I think that we're seeing a lot of projects come to that realization that you can have kind of these segmented shared states, these little micro universes of consensus. And then I assume that you must have some kind of overarching batch resolution method, right? You have all these sharded states that you have to then reconcile at the end of the day between each other, right? To create the overall network. Is that true?
Yes. And that's called the meta chain. There's a meta chain that communicates all these shards. Then the idea is that as long as you have a very clear version of the meta chain where everything is in sync, you basically have both the throughput and then also the sync within the entire network, so that everything can move forward one block at a time, but in a way that doesn't compromise anything, and then has this unbreakable security and history.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess that's a way you can solve the double spend problem and make sure that at the end of the day, these transactions are reliable and secure, but also scalable. So it's almost kind of an inversion of layer two and layer one, as you've kind of inverted them and realized the benefits. So why don't we get into what the project has achieved so far? You said you're live at the beginning of our conversation. So what does live mean to you, and what can developers and users start doing on it?
So the goal of Elrond, which I think is very, very important to underscore, is that we're trying to build the backbone for a high bandwidth, low latency, transparent financial system. And then secondly, give access to this system to anyone, anywhere. And why we're doing this is that we believe that fundamentally the current economic system is broken in a way that cannot be solved from the inside. Both opaqueness, misaligned incentives, and low bandwidth of the current economic system are very, very problematic. But then second, there are still 1.7 billion people that don't have access to basic financial infrastructure. So we believe that if we can bring a system like this live and offer it to the world, we could bring perhaps the largest global GDP multiplier since the invention of the internet. And now coming to where we are, this is the goal. The question is, where did we start from, and what did we achieve in the meantime?
So I'd like to shift the conversation over to, what problem do you think this is going to solve? How are you going to incentivize new businesses to join on, or users? And what have you achieved so far? You mentioned earlier in the video that you've gone live. So what does this mean exactly?
Sure. So again, just putting this in context, Elrond is built with the goal of creating a high bandwidth, low latency, transparent financial system, and then extend access to this financial system to anyone, anywhere. And we believe this is fundamentally important, especially today, because on the one hand, the current economy is very low bandwidth. You still have very low bandwidth and high latency. So you still have to wait for overnight transfers, weekends are closed, and so forth. A lot of inefficiency there. There are broken pieces of the system that cannot be solved from the inside. The system is still very much opaque, and so forth. And having an alternative to this, a complementary alternative, would of course enable us to work much faster at a higher scale for the entire global economy. And then second of all, there are still 1.7 billion people that are not connected to the current financial system, don't have any kind of basic financial infrastructure, and giving them a chance to participate would increase the entire pie significantly for the entire world. And we're trying to do these two things in two ways. The first one is done via the Elrond network, which is this new layer 1 blockchain, which addresses the fundamental problems that we've discussed about from first principles. So trying to find a solution that is sufficiently high bandwidth and low latency to enable businesses from all over the world to start building on the blockchain layer without having to worry about economics not making sense, performance not making sense, and just be able to ship the applications they really care about. And then the second element is, of course, a user interface that enables us to give access to anyone in the world with a simple mobile application to the coolest blockchain features. This is called Mayar. This has been launched only 2 months from, I think, the 30th of January. But the excitement that we've seen and the progress adoption we've seen are tremendous. So let me get back on each of these points. The Elrond network, from where we set out to, is now has been launched since 30th of July last year. What does it mean that it has been launched? So we have a fully state-sharded architecture with now more than 3,200 nodes distributed all over the world. And this now is probably one of the largest proof-of-stake networks in production. Second, we can process upwards of 15,000 transactions per second right now with a 0.001 cent transaction cost. But this can scale to hundreds of thousands of transactions, because remember, with the state sharding element, we just need to add a few more shards to scale beyond 100,000 transactions. We have actually done some demonstration of the network doing upwards of 250,000 transactions per second. And at this point, we don't see necessarily the demand. So what we want to do is focus on bringing in the demand showing that there's a real use case that businesses really want to use this, and then scale up beyond 100,000 transactions if needed. Now, beyond the network being live, beyond it be able to process more than 15,000 transactions per second and having more than 3,200 nodes, it's important to note that we're at the point where more than 63% of the network, of the circulating supply is staked. So a lot of demand on that front and growing significantly. Second, we basically came to a point where in January, as I said, we launched this new application called Myar, which purpose was to simplify the blockchain experience, enable anyone to send money to anyone to a username or a hero tag, and then do so in a way that they don't have to learn everything regarding private public keys and so forth. So what has happened is that in 4 days since the launch of Myar, we basically doubled the number of addresses on the network, doubled the number of transactions processed in 6 months. We had a number like something like 1 million transactions processed, and then in 4 days we crossed 2 million. And at this point, we're at something like 340,000 users within the Myar application in just 2 months. So the growth has been tremendous. We're at probably something like almost 4.5 million transactions processed within the network, and something like 550,000 addresses within the network. Things are growing very, very significantly, and we're just preparing for the next phase of growth where the smart contracts are live within Elrond, so people can build a lot of cool things with a Rust framework that is available to developers. We have a Mandos testing framework that enables developers to then, as they deploy a smart contract or before they deploy a smart contract, to test things in real time, see where the bugs are, and so forth. We have a kind of WASM VM on which this Rust framework is built, and then everything is integrated in a basic VS Code layer that enables developers to interact with the SDK, with the Rust framework, with the Mandos testing framework in a very, very simple manner, so that they can go through the development process as fast as possible. Now, the most exciting things within the network are the DeFi module that's coming live within this scalable network. So within the DeFi module, we have a Myar exchange, which is this automated market maker built on Elrond to leverage the performance of the architecture and enable streamlined liquidity for the entire network. A lot of projects that are coming live and have been preparing to come live are now speeding up things. And the Myar exchange will have its own tokens, the MEX token. The MEX token will be basically available. It's fully community-based, not owned by any team and so forth. It's just shared with the e-gold holders, which have e-gold, are staking e-gold, have some of them in Myar and so forth. So once the exchange comes live, the second element is the Myar Launchpad, which is this very, very important platform where we select some of the coolest startups in the world that are trying to take blockchain technology beyond blockchain as an ecosystem. So they are implementing blockchain in some fields with high impact. In a way that's very, very meaningful. We have a lot of startups that are applying already and during the next 1 or 2 weeks, we'll announce the first really exciting startup that is coming live on the Elrond Launchpad. Then beyond this, the Maiar lending platform is also coming live. Again, the idea is that since we have this scalable network and we have this very simple user interface, of course that on top of them, you want to offer everything related to money, like crypto money, but also stable coins that exist. And then on top of that, you will have basically any type of exchanges being enabled, any type of lending being enabled, then synthetic assets, and then bridges to all the main architectures and blockchains in the space. NFTs are also coming live in Maiar in the next 1 or 2 months. In May, we're basically prioritizing this very, very much. And beyond this, what I would basically underscore is that we see this as perhaps the most important generational opportunity in the technology space since the invention of the internet. And the key thing is that we're not seeing it as a zero-sum game. So this is not a game of Elrond being the Ethereum killer or Elrond being the Bitcoin killer and so forth. This is just a zero-sum framing. But when you understand things correctly, you understand that we basically have something like 100 million people within the space at this point, and we could have billions of people that could really use this services, this new economy, and do it in a way that's really compelling. So if we enable the next billion people to join, it's not only Elrond that will win, but the Bitcoin, Ethereum, the exchanges, and all the really compelling platforms that exist. And it's that's the one thing that's super, super exciting for us. And this is why we're taking this very different approach of not only creating the technical architecture, but combining it with the simplicity of a mobile application to really enable the next billion people to join.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's an excellent vision. Let's unpack a little bit of that because I heard a lot of themes that resonate with me, and I'm also curious about a few things. So, you mentioned the e-gold. I assume EGLD is a symbol regarding the native digital asset or token of the Elrond platform. Is that correct?
Yes. E-gold is this, maybe just simplifying things. E-gold is this idea that we've had books and then e-books. We've had basically mail and email, and then we've had gold and e-gold. This is the idea that will scale and through which we convey things very, very simply.
Okay, so you have the native token, and I assume that in the proof of stake system, the node validators stake a certain amount of their of the e-gold, which I assume has a finite supply, and then as part of the stake, it augments the security model, and then they can process transactions. Does the e-gold have some kind of yield for the validators for processing those transactions, and how does that work exactly?
So indeed, e-gold has a fixed supply. At this point, the fixed supply is equal to pi. So there's about approximately 31 million that will ever be possible to exist. But this supply basically decreases with each passing day in a way where of course, the network puts in an incentive for the security and transaction processing of the entire network. And this incentive is basically paid either via this new emission from the current supply to the potential maximum supply. At this point, we're at something like 17.5 million, and that's the total maximum to which it will go for the validators. But there's a very interesting approach here where if we have enough adoption, the supply becomes fixed and no new emission comes into circulation because there's a specific incentive defined for the validators for each of the 1 to 10 years. And then if the amount of rewards that's coming from adoption, so from real transactions being processed within the network, is higher than the defined reward for the validators, at that point, no new emission comes into circulation. So this is a very, very elegant approach of having the bootstrapping done, having a lot of security, a lot of transaction processing. But if the adoption picks up and is basically beyond 10.87% during the first year, then 9.78% during the second year, and so forth, at that point, no new emission comes into circulation, and Elrond or eGold becomes a lot scarcer with each new adoption cycle kicking in.
So again, this seems to be a very interesting inversion of the balance between new emissions, as you call it, or in Bitcoin stock to flow, versus the fees that the proof of work miners collect to process the transactions. This is kind of an inversion of that, and saying, as the network scales up, so that you don't have this kind of deluge of supply of the token, you'll effectively throttle down on the normal emission schedule, the embedded stock to flow, and rely more on the fee schedule in such a point that eventually you don't need any emissions at all, right? That you don't need this kind of just monetary policy that is deflationary. So at the end of the day, you're gonna yield kind of a equilibrium, it seems, in the system that are based primarily on transactions and basically the utility use of it, rather than just waiting for tokens to be instantiated. So that seems very, very, very clever. Very clever. I commend you on that. That's excellent.
I think this is the best of both worlds. So there is a fixed maximum supply, of course, but that fixed maximum supply decreases each day where you have real adoption, which is the coolest thing possible, because it means you have a potential stock to flow for each of the years, but then the revised stock to flow can mean that in 3 years you reach maximum, because if adoption is basically bringing beyond 10% rewards for the validator, then from that point, you have no new emission. And this doesn't mean that it will happen in year 5 or year 3, but it means that this is a kind of challenge. If you can bring adoption during year 1 to exceed that type of reward threshold, then starting with year 1, you'll be in a different kind of scenario. And it's also one of the first compelling models where you have both Bitcoin's scarcity and a model to bootstrap until you reach a kind of adoption where the entire incentive relies upon fees and not inflation, right?
Yeah, no, and that's super exciting, because that's one of the things that either in Bitcoin or Ethereum, nobody really anticipates what it will look like when it's entirely fee-based, right? And what you're proposing is basically you're accelerating the monetary policy many years, right? You're not waiting until that final supply is complete. You're going to let the market determine that, and it will just be variable with respect to the demand of the network itself. So I think that's very, very interesting. I'm excited to see how it turns out. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about how Elrond integrates with maybe other blockchains. Is there any aspect of interoperability? Because earlier you talked about several layers that you foresee building on top of it, exchanges or automated market makers. Is there any idea of interoperability? And I guess one other question is the Ethereum virtual machine also implemented? So is it easy to port smart contracts and other features from Ethereum or other chains?
Sure. So the idea, I believe, is that the further down you look, the clearer it becomes that without interoperability, this will be just segregated islands. It doesn't matter how much scalability you have. Of course, at first, this matters a lot because you gather a kind of critical mass of adoption of businesses, partners, and so forth. And we have more than 150 partners that are part of the Elrond network, are building, contributing, and so forth to the Elrond ecosystem at this point. But it's extremely important that you enable a streamlined flow between all the main blockchains that exist out there, so that value can flow from each one to each one and leverage some of these interesting properties that we discovered within different blockchains. So what we're doing specifically to address this is twofold. We have a layer of bridges that are coming live, and we already have one that integrates or creates interoperability between Elrond and Bitcoin, Elrond and Ethereum, Elrond and Binance Smart Chain, Elrond and Ontology, and then some other blockchains that are currently in the process. But this is already covering more than 80% of, significantly more than 80% of the network. And then we're going to take this one step at a time in validating some of the key blockchains that we discover, with which we see synergies and complementary approaches, and adding each of them, so that as we enable new exchanges, lending platforms, and so forth, this DeFi element will ideally first become very scalable and very user-friendly, and then it will become cross-chain, right? Just interoperable with other ecosystems. And we're quite excited about this phase and believe that at some point, this will be super common sense, right? Well, we're not even talking anything wild here. It's super, super basic.
I 100% agree. I think that's how the Internet of Value is going to form, is through cross-chain interoperability. And, so far up to this point, every blockchain has had to worry about how it's going to bring liquidity into the ecosystem and then survive on its own, right, as kind of this isolated ecosystem. And what you're suggesting is, if you abstract these layers to build business logic on, and then build these bridges to other chains, then they can essentially share in each other's liquidity. They can draw on liquidity from other chains and then build financial instruments that actually are useful, and that the user then is kind of agnostic to the underlying technology. What they care about is solving a specific problem in their daily life. They don't care about which chain necessarily they might be using. So I absolutely agree. That aligns with the vision I see for how this is going to turn out, rather than a few isolated islands, which is kind of the way the internet started. We're going to have this network of networks and interoperability. So I think you're spot on there. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe the next 6 months where you see Elrond building this future, and what maybe if you can give us a sneak peek of some of the more exciting applications that you see being built on Elrond?
Sure. The idea, as I said, is if we zoom out again and look at the early internet days, there have been two specific critical moments that have changed the trajectory of the early internet days. The first one was the browser, which simplified things to such a degree that anyone could just come in and click on some websites, and then in effect, it created a market to be addressed. And then the second one was this transition from dial-up to broadband. And this enabled businesses to really build something that makes sense, not only sounds interesting, but then makes sense from a business and economic standpoint. And I believe we're at that particular point in time where we finally have both the performance really needed to bring some more exciting applications within the blockchain space. And then we also have the simplicity needed via an application like Myar to really onboard tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and then billions of people. And within this space, then you can see how things will accelerate to a point where I believe the most exciting thing for the next period will be probably the point at which one of these blockchain networks exceeds the value of a lot of countries. And then people basically resonate much more with a digital cloud country, let's say, than a real country in the world, in a complementary manner, of course. And what Elrond tries to do on this front is, one, of course, the main focus is in building Maiar and bringing a lot of users in, enabling them to, as I said, exchange value, because in Maiar we have a distributed name service that enables usernames instead of private public keys, but integrates them already with several blockchains. So you can not only send eGold to friends via a username, but you can also send Ethereum, you can also send Binance, and probably this week or the next, Bitcoin as well. So this already brings you in a different world where you're playing, and then you discover that you can really do this type of global transfer at trivial cost, with almost instant speeds. But then moving further down the road, the most exciting elements we see is the Maiar exchange that we've already announced, and is based on this advanced automated market maker that is coming live in the next few weeks. It's super exciting to be able to have in-network built-in liquidity within the Elrond ecosystem and see how this takes off. But I would expect this to be one of the most significant advances beyond the network being live and Maiar being live, because at this point, you're going to become economically significant. You have the full circle of projects not only announcing that they come, not only building stuff, but then also releasing their tokens, having the utility within their ecosystem. And to do this, of course, we have the Elrond Standard Digital Token, which is a kind of improved version of ERC20 that people can rely on, and that has native Elrond speed without the need for smart contracts. So it simplifies interaction so that projects can build it very fast, enable things. And then when you have the Maiar exchange, you have the ESDT version integrated within the Maiar exchange. So you have liquidity immediately. And this, I believe, will accelerate the entire economy within the Elrond ecosystem. Beyond this, of course, there's the Maiar Launchpad, as I said, where we'll see a lot of other vertical integrated use cases with super compelling startups, where it's not about quantity, but really qualitative teams that are hardcore and pushing for this level. And they'll be able to raise funds, they'll be able to get the support of the Elrond community, and so forth. And we're very excited because the people within the community, of course, are very much looking forward to participate in other projects, to support them, to go through this entire exciting and adventurous process that we're putting forward. Then the lending platform and NFTs, I believe, will be super powerful. And just adding one touch on that front, I think to sum up, the impact of NFTs will be to artists very much as tech startups have been to technical people. So we'll see the next generation of artists just dropping out of school and then focusing on building communities and building these new ideas, bringing them to life within their communities. And NFTs will be the key element enabling that. We just need a way to express NFTs without the noise, right? Because the difficult thing is not in adding 1,000 element and creating this whole noise wave that we are seeing right now, but in taking some things away, adding a kind of productive constraint, filtering mechanisms, so as to see what's valuable and what's not. Where's the signal and where's the noise? And this is what we are super excited about, because it will come in Maya, where it's at first invited only, with some really top artists from around the world, and then gradually rolling out to a larger community, but in a way where you feel that there's something special out there and you're not just throwing your NFT in the trash bin.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense in terms of curation, right? I mean, Netflix, for example, they curate exactly the type of content that they think their users may want, but then they start getting intelligent about, taking the feedback of prior reviews and, recommendation engines, and using machine learning to say, hey, here's the next thing you might want to watch. I think in the NFT space, to your point, there is a significant amount of noise, and we're going to need better algorithms, better curation methods to kind of distill the good art from the bad, or the useless tokens. So I absolutely agree. I think there's so much opportunity to build on all these infrastructures, but to your point, the fundamentals have to be strong. You have to have high throughput, scalability, security on layer one to make sure you can really build these business abstractions to the level that we need them, right, at a global scale. So I absolutely agree. So I'm very excited to see how this progresses. I hope that we'll have you back on Real Vision to discuss in detail as these things come out, and we can look backwards and say whether they were successful or not. We learn from our failures too, I think. So can we get you to commit now to come back and share with us what the status?
100%. No, I think the next, as I said before, the next period, I'll even go so far to say that during this year, we'll probably see the first nation states. So either nation states and really large institution adopting things to a point where you feel like the tipping point has been reached. And then a new wave is coming. And we're specifically working with Elrond to create and accelerate this type of wave. Because if we can bring this, then the entire space, like the entire discussion, will shift a few years ahead. And we're definitely open to having the conversations and coming back with more updates and exciting news as things unfold.
That's fantastic. Excellent. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Santiago. Really great to have this discussion.